going to pass the baton to Marcy.
Okay, well, thank you all for being here. So as Missy mentioned, I grew up in Saratoga Springs, New York, which is in upstate New York. It's in the foothill region of the Adirondack Mountains. So from various points in this small city, you can see the mountains. And I spent quite a bit of time in the woods playing, and I think that really kind of fueled my imagination. And it took some time to sort of realize that that's starting to come out in my work, or that's influenced the way I see. So I'm going to start by talking about this group of work right here, which is the Unearthing series. And it's a series that started not long after my son was born. And it's inspired by photographers like Francesca Woodman, who performed in her photographs and used the slow shutter speed. Photographers who also used slow shutter speed and made kind of dreamlike imagery, like Ralph Eugene Wheatyard. And then also, I was thinking about Cy Twombly and his painting, and also abstract photography by the Bauhaus photographers. So I'm pulling from a lot of different sources in terms of inspiration for this work. And also it was inspired by this sort of new experience of becoming a parent. And so these works are about this idea of a controlled environment with some chaos in it. There's a reference to constellation in these. And there's also a tension between there's a tension between frustration and control and wonder and delight. So there's a lot of juxtapositions in these. When I imagined them, I could see them as these three-dimensional environments or installations, which became a place for drawing and painting, and also the various elements within the installation, like wire or string or branches, became formal elements of line and other elements within the installation. And so in some of these, I'm playing with the viewer's perspective. So in this image right here, it was actually shot the other way around, but I reversed it. And when I was making these works, I had been asked if I would do a kind of a behind-the-scenes video of how they were constructed and how I made them. And I never wanted to do that because actually the works themselves, the installations themselves, there was something sort of missing from them when they were still and when the overhead lights were on. But when the overhead lights were off and the other lights were turned on and the shutter was opened, there was this sort of magic that could happen. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about photography is that the camera can see or capture what we can't see necessarily. It can compress time, it can create something that is sort of based in reality, but sort of not, sort of in this other imagined space. And that became significant to me. I'm going to just move right over here to these works. I just want to point a couple of things out. When I was working on these, I put some constraints on them, or constraints on myself rather, when I was building them, where I was using mostly black and white materials. So I was either using black or white paint, charcoal or chalk, white string or black string, and then the backdrops were either black or in some cases I used a midnight blue, which is in this one. But the only other things that actually have color are the natural objects. So the branches, the flowers, the leaves, things like my hand, which appears in them, things like that. And the color that you're seeing in some of them, like this one, comes from light. And the way that the light was moved and reflected off of other objects is how this color appeared in the sky. So when I was creating these, I couldn't even necessarily see what they would be until afterwards. And that's
that's one of those magic moments or one of those wonderful things I'm talking about in terms of photography. And part of what I was striving for with this project. So the title of these is Unearthing, and it refers to this process of discovery or finding, and that's a big part of it, is trying to find these things. In an image like this, you can see a little bit of my arm, and I'm holding something that's reflective that has lines in it, and so creating lines or drawing within the space. But then you can also see I'm kind of playing with this two-dimensional versus three-dimensional aspect of the space, where in parts of it, it looks sort of flat and two-dimensional, like a drawing, and then in other places, it starts to emerge as more three-dimensional. Does anybody have any questions right now? Yes?
What happened to, it's like what happened to it? Is it like a humidity thing in storage or?
Just the top one. It's probably because part of it is the paper, and it's printed on Kozo paper, which is, it's just, it has kind of a texture to it. Yeah. Janine.
How big, are your installations? Are they like a room size?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, they're huge. So it was seamless paper, and sometimes it was 2 sheets of seamless paper, so it was pretty big. And some of them you can get a sense of scale. Well, in that one back there, you can kind of get a sense of scale because you can see how big my hand is compared to the rest of the scene. And it would take about a month to make one image, because I was just building all these things and layering these things to create the final image. Yeah.
What materials did you use, and did you edit these in the program afterwards?
That's a great question. So some of them were sort of composited, but not many. Most of them were just one shot. And so really what happened was maybe a little bit of adjustment for printing or something like that. But for the most part, it was one shot. And the ones where they were composited, I was only doing that to be able to print them larger. So I was taking several shots, like almost like a grid of the space, so that I could make a bigger print. But yeah, the layering that you're seeing is because of that slow shutter speed, or that amount of time that it took for the shutter to be open and for the movement to occur.
If you can remember, how long was your longest shutter speed open for, or just kind of average, how long did you have it open for?
I think it was like anywhere between, I want to say 8 seconds and 30 seconds. So in some ways they were fairly quick, but because they could be much longer. But in general, it was somewhere in there.
I want to know how you got the glare on the midnight blue one. It's so stunning, but like every other dot, I'm pretty sure it's like some sort of light in the background that stays still, but how do you get the glare?
The little light burst, is that what you mean? Yeah, so that just had to do with the angle of the camera, but yeah, so the backdrop had holes poked into it, and there was a light shining through those holes. So it just had to do with how it was caught by the camera.
Why did you choose to use branches instead of any other dirt?
Yeah, actually, in this one, it's very subtle, but there's a vine that twists, and it's moving in here, and it has string wrapped around it, so you can kind of see it. But branches, I thought, made really nice lines, basically. But when I was gathering these materials, I was gathering them in my neighborhood, and I was dragging these huge branches down the street. I mean, I looked like a crazy person. But, and they had to be big because of the scale of the installations themselves. So that's why. And I wanted these constructed environments to have some relationship to the natural world. So that's also why I was using branches and leaves and things like that.
Was the backdrop on the floor or hanging? Because when I look at the string on the one up there, it looks very 3D as if it came on itself, but it also looks flat with the branches, but also not.
Right. So the backdrops were hanging, but there were other things that were hanging in front of it. And when I was talking before about how these installations were not quite perfect, when the overhead lights were on, things would fall. It was a little messy. It just was not quite the same as what you're seeing right there. So I think that, if I'm remembering this correctly, I think that string was hanging a little bit in front of the backdrop. But it has that kind of 2D, 3D tension. Yeah.
Yes. Is there a purpose behind different sizes?
Some of them, I like seeing them big, but it's hard to print everything big. But I think that they also work in this size too. So, yeah. But they can, each of these can exist in either size.
When you said it takes you a month to complete one image, so can you walk through what your process is for that month? Like,
Sure.
Obviously, don't take much, but.
Yeah. And I completed this project a few years ago, so I'm remembering this. But as I remember it, I would hang the backdrop, I would draw and paint on it somewhat. I would start poking holes through it and light it. And then I'd probably draw and paint on it again and wait for that to dry and then poke more holes through it and start hanging things and just start figuring out the way certain elements worked. So it was a process that's actually very similar to painting, where you're layering things and you're also figuring out how the composition can fit together.
Did you take test shots?
I did, yes. So throughout it, I would photograph it and then go back to it. And, no, this isn't working. No, I have to move this, or yeah. Thank you.
When are you going to do an installation show?
I don't know.
I'd be fascinated to see that.
Yeah.
Just
But
the way you describe what you're creating it'd be wonderful. Big show.
yeah, but that also falls into what I was talking about before about that video of the installation itself and how it was missing a little something. Like, I think the performative aspect of these helps make them magical, and that's what's really wonderful about photography, and that's what I was sort of striving for, kind of reaching for. So yes, I appreciate the sculptural aspect of this. Yeah.
How did you decide between the different kinds of printing processes or papers?
You've witnessed some of this. I've tried everything. So I've tried printing these on Kozo, which these are. Some of them are on a rag, which this is. That one's on a semi-gloss Baryta. The color comes out differently on the different papers, and it really took some time to figure out which was the best paper for that particular image, and there wasn't one paper that fit the entire project, which was a little unusual. So, yeah. All right, well, let's move on to, and one more thing I just want to mention is that this work has been shown in various spaces, the Ogden Museum of Art, the Berlin Biennial of Fine Art and Documentary Photography, and other nonprofit spaces, and it was also recognized by PX3, the Paris Photography Awards, and the Julia and Cameron Awards. Okay. So this project grew out of the previous project. So I continued taking these blocks and collecting botanicals, but on a smaller scale. I was also thinking about those moments of magic that I was talking about, but I was also thinking about them a little bit differently in terms of beauty and ideas of beauty and ways in which we experience beauty. And I had an idea in mind for how I wanted these to come into existence, so I could see them in my mind. And then I had to go about and learn how to make them. So these works are about finding beauty and exploration of beauty as an antidote to personal and political crisis. So a lot of people will find beauty in the natural world as a place of refuge, And there's a writer named John O'Donoghue who has said that I think that beauty is not a luxury, but that it ennobles the heart and reminds us of the infinity within us. And that really resonated with me, and that inspired the project. And what he's talking about is not just beauty in the visual sense, but also this experience of beauty, which is different for everyone, but transcendence. That's really what he's talking about. So some works, like this one right here, that Luscious Day, is about those more ethereal, transcendent moments. Would be that one. Or this one right here, Once Was, is about memory and those moments, and the ways in which we can experience all these things. So I brought with me some prints just to talk a little bit about the process, because I get a lot of questions about how these are made. So I will capture the image and print it on vellum. And vellum's a semi-transparent paper. And then I apply gold leaf to the back of the print. So this is a 24 karat gold leaf, and that's why it has the color that it does. I also use 18 karat gold leaf, which is the lighter yellow that you'll see in some of the images. It's coated with a archival varnish, and it's also coated with cold wax to kind of allow for all this shine. So I was talking about those ethereal, transcendent moments, and that relates to the materials that I'm using. That's why I'm using gold. So when you think about reaching that higher self, it relates so much to this brightness and kind of the shininess of the gold. So that's where they sort of connect. Let's head over here. So the project started right before the pandemic, and it continued throughout the pandemic. And you may recall that several political movements were going on during the pandemic, and there were political protests and that sort of thing. And that also influenced the work and how I was seeing things. So there's an image like this one, which is Firestorm, Time for Change. That's a bit more explosive in nature, and it's a bit different in that sense. There are other images like these that are a little bit calmer. But you'll notice that in a lot of the images, there are flowers that are sort of in their height of bloom and very luscious, like the ones that we were just talking about, but there are others that are sort of more common wildflowers, or maybe considered weeds by some people, right? They're sort of overlooked, they're not necessarily anything that we would notice right away. And I started to see those as stand-ins for people and political change. And so I was recognizing them by gilding them, and I'm seeing the gold leaf as representative of those ideas of empowerment and justice, and that also speaks to why I'm using the gold leaf in these images. So like this one, or this one over here, Curtis Waves. So it's another sort of layer to the project. I was fortunate enough to work with Yaki Press on a book of this project, and we paired the images with a poem by Khalil Gibran, and the poem is on beauty. And the poem is about the various ways in which we can experience beauty, and that ultimately it exists within oneself. So what we did was we printed the images with a gold metallic ink. It's a Pantone metallic ink. And then we also used this unusual binding where the interior of the book, the pages are sort of bound together, and they're also coated on the back. And so this ties into this idea of beauty coming from within. So in the right light, if I'm over by the window, this will sort of shine from within. Okay, so it sort of ties these. ideas together. I was pleased to find out last week that the book sold out from the publisher. So that's exciting. So anyway, I just want to say that although this project in some ways is about pain and uncertainty, it's also a metaphor for hope, and I see that as very much relating to all that we've been through these past 2 years. So thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Are you doing a reprint?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm not sure yet, but I don't think so.
How did you capture this one, lightning birds?
That image, so I said that was influenced by Bauhaus and Surrealist photographers, and that one was inverted. So it's the black background that you're seeing is a negative.
Marcy, I hadn't done a lot with gold leaf, but it's like a really thin, flaky, or thin. How did you get it? I mean, you don't have any brush marks. I mean, it's just like it's like magic coated.
Thanks. It comes in sheets, and it's taken a while to learn how to get it down very smoothly. But I think that's also where the vellum is a little bit forgiving, so that helps as well.
Because it's almost like you would dip the paper in to coat it, but that can't be.
No. But it's applied very delicately. And actually, that's one of the risky things about doing these large prints is if something goes wrong, I have to completely start over.
Right.
And I can't do anything with whatever went wrong. Got to figure out a way to repurpose those mistakes. I still haven't figured it out.
Is it expensive?
Well, it can be in that sense, you know. So, yeah. Yes.
The flowers over here and the Luscious thing, it looks like it's not pressed. It looks like it's just a flower. So you arrange it on the sheet and then take a picture of it.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
I actually have a story to tell.
No, I think we'll wait until later. Yeah, I think we'll wait till later. Thank you.
When I screwed up the chemicals, and that was the best one.
Yeah, that was, we were doing chemigrams, and he spilled some chemicals, and it turned out to be fantastic.
Molly has a
Uh-huh.
Asian art,
Mm-hmm.
the beauty of business.
Yeah.
Is that part of the ones that are not live plants? Is that part of what you're showing?
I suppose. I mean, I think, it started by finding beauty in different ways that we can experience it, but I see this sort of a rounded concept where, beauty in the way that I'm exploring it is a respite or refuge from pain and uncertainty. So I feel like both are held within this concept. So, yeah, that relates.
How long has this process been around for? Do you know?
That's a great question. So this is a modern take on the orotone process. So Edward Curtis used the orotone process with his glass photographs. I'm not using glass and I'm using digital materials, but it's very much related. I mean, I'm still backing the image with gold.
Mm-hmm.
So you could say it goes back, over 100 years, or about 100 years, but it's a different take on it. Yeah.
Marcy,
Yes.
when you were showing the book, you press the page, and so each page that you have printed, you have to have a separate page with the gold leaf printed on the back.
It's the pages are all connected and folded together, and they're bound together. So it's like it was printed in a sheet and then folded and then bound together that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
Is there a significance between the ones that you chose to do with 24K and 18 karat?
That's a great question. So some of them just don't work with one color or the other. And so since I was printing on vellum, what I could do is I can kind of take the print and put it on the back of another print just to get an idea as to what's going to work and what isn't. But it took a little while to figure that out. So but yeah, some look better with the lighter tones and others look better with the darker tones. Yes.
How do these works fall in your mind in the context of art history and whether it be photo history or painting or otherwise? Are there influences that are
Right, I
particularly
forgot to mention that. Yeah, so I am influenced by Anna Atkins and Carl Blossfeld. So they isolated their subjects from its natural surroundings. They did that for different reasons. So Atkins did it for scientific reasons. Blossfeld did it because he was paying attention to form and shape. I'm pulling them out of their natural, space into a more imagined space, or that's how I see it. So I like that they're in this kind of otherworldly space. But I'm also very much influenced by Bauhaus photographers. And if you look at these look like they could be from another time period in some ways. And I think that also relates to where I come from as well. So the Saratoga Springs, where I come from, it has a strong sense of history. It was originally populated by Mohawk indigenous people in the 1700s. English settlers came in and built a hotel near the natural springs that are there, and it became a place for health and wellness. And eventually a city emerged. It's a place that was significant in the Revolutionary War. The Battle of Saratoga took place not far from the city center. And even if you go there today, there's still a lot of Victorian buildings that are used and well maintained, and it's very much an identity or part of the identity of that place. And so I see that as kind of coming out in a lot of these images as well. That sense of history and then also those other influences. Any other questions? Yes.
When did you get the idea to do the larger size? I mean, as far as sizes, approaching this in certain sizes, what was your thought process? Because obviously the larger sizes take more tedious work and it's a little more dangerous.
Yes. So I had to have enough confidence in my technique and how I was doing them. But I didn't see them as necessarily having to be small, even from when I started it. I was starting small because that's what I could do, and that's what the materials that I had available could do. But eventually I got a larger printer and I got better at the technique, and I was able to make these bigger pieces.
Are there any differences in the editions?
Yeah.
So, but like, let's say these are editions of 10, these smaller ones.
Mm-hmm.
Do they look different if you look at number 1 versus number 10?
Yeah, they're in a variable edition because of the handmade aspect of it. I try and get them as
unique.
Yeah, yeah.
The application process.
Do you run it like? Do you run through one photo 10 times, or do you go back and forth between photos? If you're printing and build, do you stick to one?
Not necessarily. So I may make a few, but I know what they look like and I know how they're supposed to look. But yeah, they do vary a little bit because of the handmade aspect of it. But that's also something that's kind of wonderful about them too. They look different in different lighting, which is one of the wonderful things about gold leaf. And so the different, just by kind of getting a different angle or shining light on it in a different way, it's going to shine in a different way. Any other questions?
You mentioned that your other work has been exhibited elsewhere. Has this work been exhibited?
Yes. This has been shown in a solo show at the Griffin Museum of Photography. It's been shown at the Ogden Museum of Art and in other nonprofit spaces. There's a few pieces up front behind the front desk, and those have been shown at the Ely Center for Contemporary Art, the Louisiana Museum of Art and Science, and the Center for Photographic Art. Thank you all.